October 2021, and welcome to the morning Srimad-Bhagavatam class here at ISKCON Dublin. And as ever, we will start with the chanting of Jai Radha Madhava. Hare Krishna. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana, Jamunatira Vanachari, Yamunatira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana, Yamunatira Vanachari, Yamunatira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana, Yamunatira Vanachari, Yamunatira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 16, Text 11. And the name of Chapter 16 is How Parīkṣit, or Mahārāja Parīkṣit, King Parīkṣit, received the age of Kali, which of course is the age that we are currently living in. Svalaṅkṛtaṁ śyāma-turaṅga-yojitaṁ, rathaṁ mṛgendra-dhvajam āśritaḥ purāt, vṛto rathāśva-dvipapatti-yuktayā, sva-senayā, digvijayāya, nirgataḥ. Got a little bit of extra light on for myself here. I'll be able to read the sloka properly. svalaṅkṛtaṁ śyāma-turaṅga-yojitaṁ rathaṁ mṛgendra-dhvajam āśritaḥ purāt vṛto rathāśva-dvipapatti-yuktayā sva-senayā digvijayāya nirgataḥ svalaṅkṛtaṁ śyāma-turaṅga-yojitaṁ rathaṁ mṛgendra-dhvajam āśritaḥ purāt vṛto rathāśva-dvipapatti-yuktayā sva-senayā digvijayāya nirgataḥ svalaṅkṛtaṁ śyāma-turaṅga-yojitaṁ rathaṁ mṛgendra-dhvajam āśritaḥ purāt vṛto rathāśva-dvipapatti-yuktayā sva-senayā digvijayāya nirgataḥ svalaṅkṛtaṁ śyāma-turaṅga-yojitaṁ rathaṁ mṛgendra-dhvajam āśritaḥ purāt vṛto rathāśva-dvipapatti-yuktayā sva-senayā digvijayāya nirgataḥ. svalaṅkṛtaṁ, very well decorated. Sham, black. Turanga, horses. Yojitam, tackled. Rathaṁ, chariot. Mṛga-indra, lion. Dhvajam, flagged. āśritaḥ, under the protection. Purāt, from the capital. vṛto, surrounded by. rathaṁ, charioteers. āśritaḥ, cavalry. digvijayāya, elephants. yuktayā, thus being equipped. sva-senayā, along with infantry. digvijayāya, for the purpose of conquering. nirgataḥ, went out. Translation. Mahārāja Parīkṣit sat on a chariot drawn by black horses. His flag was marked with the sign of a lion. Being so decorated, surrounded by charioteers, cavalry, elephants, and infantry soldiers, he left the capital to conquer in all directions. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Mahārāja Parīkṣit is distinguished from his grandfather Arjuna, for black horses pulled his chariot instead of white horses. He marked his flag with the mark of a lion, and his grandfather marked his with the mark of Hanumanji. A royal procession like that of Mahārāja Parīkṣit, surrounded by well-decorated chariots, cavalry, elephants, infantry, and band, not only is pleasing to the eyes, but is also a sign of a civilization that is ascetic, even on the fighting front. Translation again. Mahārāja Parīkṣit sat on a chariot drawn by black horses. His flag was marked with the sign of a lion. Being so decorated and surrounded by charioteers, cavalry, elephants, and infantry soldiers, he left the capital to conquer in all directions. Om Ajala-timirandasya Dhananjana-shalakaya Chakshur-ummilitam yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya-manubhishtam Stapitam yena putale Srimad-Bhagavatam Dasa Srimad-Bhagavatam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It's interesting what's being described here in today's verse, and then also in the purport, particularly the last sentence. A royal procession like that of Mahārāja Parīkṣit, surrounded by well-decorated chariots, cavalry, elephants, infantry and band, not only is pleasing to the eyes, but also is a sign of a civilization that is ascetic even on the fighting front. So a couple of thoughts on that. One would be that is ascetic even on the fighting front. So fighting, or maybe a better description, particularly in the context of Mahārāja Parīkṣit, is protecting, defending, protecting citizens, society. And it's like that, isn't it? It's not only that citizens are protected, and rightly so, but also that the military, and in modern times, and ancient times too, they work under authority. They're not a law unto themselves, they work under authority. So in modern day society, particularly in countries like ours, they work under the government, who's elected by the people. So the military aren't a law unto themselves. In other times, and in what we're reading now, the military is under the rule of the king. The king is the ultimate authority, who is King Parīkṣit. So they protect the citizens, but they also protect the way of life. So in the context of what we're reading here, Mahārāja Parīkṣit is protecting the way of life known as Sanatana, or the eternal duty, the eternal occupation of each living entity to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they're protecting Mahārāja Parīkṣit here, and the army are protecting that system of governance. So fighting or protecting, as we're describing, that's a part of life. It's not something. It's not even particularly rare. Actually, it's pretty commonplace that governments and armies have to do that, protect citizens and protect the way of life that they deem best, that society should be pursuing. So why would that not be also given prominence and given attention and given resources to? So that the actual last sentence is saying that the royal possession market, surrounded by well-decorated chariots, cavalry, elephants, infantry, and band, not only is pleasing to us, but also is a sign of a civilization that is ascetic even on the fighting front. So being ascetic or pleasing like that and attractive, why would you, if you have that in other parts of society and other parts of life, why would you extract it or delete it or remove it from this particular aspect of life? The other thing that's interesting reading that is that that's still followed until today. Many armies, when they go into battle, they will have a band with them, and the band will play like that, and they will look. You see that maybe not so much in actual combat, but you see that in any, and this was a procession that was taking place here. They weren't actually a combat right at this moment. But you will see that the army is dressed so well, and they're out in their finery and their regalia, and it all can look very colourful and very attractive. Personally, for whatever reason, I've never been particularly attracted to it, but I can understand, that it looks impressive, and a lot of time and effort goes into, how they dress and how they march and how they present themselves, and it kind of looks quite pucker, and quite well presented. And the interesting thing is, because you could make an argument to say, why put so much money into all that aspect, because that's not really their main function in one sense. Their main function is actually in battle and all of that kind of thing. Why put so much time and effort and resources into this other side of it? But the truth of the actual reality is that even in our modern day world and modern day armies, is that armies that do like that, they tend to be the better prepared, the better equipped, the better trained armies that you will have on the planet. They're not ramshackle. They're not just sort of a bunch of people who come together. So this tradition is interesting. It's very much, when you think about it, it's quite interesting. What's Mahārāja Parīkṣit doing here? He's very much protecting the way of life, as I said earlier, the principles of Sanatana Dharma. So that's his main mission. That's what his goal is. And of course, this all started because of the appearance of Kali. And how did Kali appear? How did we know that it was Kali and that Kali had appeared in that sense? Was because he was torturing the innocent, particularly in the form of the bull and the cows, like that. And that horrified Mahārāja Parīkṣit, completely horrified him, just blew him away that he would see somebody in his kingdom doing such things, and committing such crimes. It was just told, because this is the first time it's happened. This is the extraordinary kind of thing. It's the first time that it's actually happened. Now it's inconceivable, to think that the killing of animals would be anything, out of the ordinary. It's just literally the norm, and goes on every single day in society. In fact, now they're running into trouble in certain countries, particularly our neighbours across the water, for a variety of reasons which we won't go into. That's kind of a bit mundane. But still, there's shortage of workforces all over the place, and one of the places that there's short is in abattoirs, where they slaughter animals. So now we get to learn a little bit about that, and how many animals they're actually slaughtering, and kind of what goes on, and but otherwise it's completely out of our sight, really, all of these things, what's going on. But anyway, they're completely just run-of-the-mill norm in our society, whereas in the society 5,000 years ago, or a little more than 5,000 years ago, this was just extraordinary to see, particularly the cow or bull being harassed and tortured and killed like that. Just totally, completely crazy. So it's just interesting. The point I was going to make was that is the main mission here, and that's Mahārāja Parīkṣit's main mission, if you like, to try to uphold a virtuous society, a mode of goodness society, a Krishna conscious society. That's very much his raison d'etre and his mission. To do that. So in our modern day equivalent, when would a modern day government, with the possible exception of somewhere like India, but I don't think it would even happen there, an army would be sort of sent out to stop animal killing and stop animal slaughter. It's just kind of pretty inconceivable that would ever happen. But that was the main mission of Mahārāja Parīkṣit. Yet the tradition of the army, looking fine and dandy, to use that word, well dressed, with their beautiful banners, and the army in their different regalia, particularly not directly in battle, but in the preparation for battle, etc., and those kinds of things, or on a procession. Quite amazing that's retained. You look at these military marches, whether they be in Russia or China or America or UK or wherever they may be. It's a pretty impressive display that they put on, and a pretty pretty impressive display that they put on. Of course, a lot of them also display their military hardware, which the equivalent was here anyway, chariots, cavalry, elephants, infantry, etc. So, it's kind of the same thing. But it's just interesting that we have retained that tradition. That's going all the way back to Mahārāja Parīkṣit's time, and even before, that tradition of the army being, aesthetically pleasing in their presentation, kind of like that. But the thing that we've dropped is the main mission, and that's just such a reflection of the society that we live in. That what's that phrase we have in English, or that saying we have in English, that somebody they know the price of everything but the value of nothing, and this is very much like that. That the external is still there, you know, it's being presented here, and it's not that it's not important, or it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but we've retained that, which is kind of the less essential thing, but the essence we've discarded, we've left behind, doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, it's amazing, you know. You talk about missing the point, you know, something being beside the point. And Prabhupada used to give the example of your 2 + 2 = 5, if that's your conclusion of 2 + 2 = 5. No matter how intelligent you are, or no matter how correct you are going forward, if you start off with that wrong equation, everything else will be skewed, everything else will be incorrect, everything else will be wrong. So it's kind of like this. The essence here is that, and the goal of Mahārāja Parīkṣit was that his society and his people would be fully in line with the purpose of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And of course, one key aspect of that is that we do not wantonly and unnecessarily inflict pain and suffering on other sentient beings. And if we ever have any doubt as to why we shouldn't do that, we should try and torture ourselves a little bit. You know, whatever torture we want, whatever torture we could tolerate to inflict on ourselves, it tends to be incredibly minor, actually, because as soon as we feel any sense of pain, we wouldn't want to continue, because who wants pain? So if it's something that we're not prepared to do, again, you could even extract from the word acharya, you could extract the same principle. For whatever we're not willing to do or inflict on ourselves, why should we have any, how can we find any justification in doing that on others like that? So it's just interesting that, yeah, in terms of the essence and the peripheral, that there's a real tendency to do that in modern society, that we often find ourselves putting more emphasis and focus on peripheral things that are not so important, but those things that are very, very important often get neglected like that. So yeah, it was just an interesting thought that came to mind, that we have retained, you know, that regalia and that display, you know, of military kind of prowess. That continues all the way going back to Mahārāja Parīkṣit time, but the essence we've discarded, we've ditched like that. And it's interesting in these different exchanges, Prabhupada, he always focuses on what the ideal society is, and one of the most important points that Srila Prabhupada makes in terms of an ideal society is that you have to have, first, the society has to be properly structured, and you have to have proper leadership. It's just it's a fundamental point that we cannot get away from. In this verse in purport today, it's talking about civilization, you know, being civilized, and of course the word civilization is coming from that, but also a sign of a civilization. It is ascetic, even on the fighting front. So this idea of a civilization, and that means, you know, a society that is civil, and of course, you know, we have those different. Gandhi was once asked, you know, he was in London, and he was asked, I think, by, you know, one of the politicians or diplomats or whatever, when he was being shown around the Houses of Parliament, I think it was, what do you think of Western civilization or British civilization? And Gandhi's response was, I think it would be a good idea. Which was very, assuming that exchange is accurate, you know, it's a very good response to make, you know, off the cuff. Very good, well done, Mr. Gandhi. Prabhupada was asked a similar question Western civilization. Prabhupada was a little bit more. He wasn't going for the. He wasn't looking for a laugh, let's say. Not that Mr. Gandhi necessarily was, but anyway, Srila Prabhupada wasn't looking for a laugh. And he was just very grave in his response. And he said that any society that kills its own mother, and he was referring to animal slaughter, and particularly the slaughter of cows, because the cow in Vedic culture is considered to be one of our 7 mothers. So Prabhupada's response was, any society that kills a cow, that kills its mother, can never be considered civilized. It's a super kind of grave point, super duper grave point, and it ties in, of course, with the whole Prabhupada's whole mission, what Mahārāja Parīkṣit was trying to do in terms of establishing the ideal society. That these are fundamental building blocks of an ideal society. You can tinker, or you can put all time, effort, resources into what you think is best in terms of your education or your hospitals or whatever they may do, and wherever they may decide to direct all their resources, at the governments that direct all the resources that they have. But if you're not getting the fundamentals right, if down the road you have an abattoir that's slaughtering hundreds of thousands of animals a week or whatever it is, I think in Ireland, we certainly slaughter and export a combination of both. Maybe some of the exports are live exports, but between the two, more animals are killed the animals that are raised on Irish soil. More animals are killed than there are populations of human beings, and I think it's actually in multiples of the population of humans. So there's roughly 5 million people in this country. So you're talking, in excess of that 5 million, and as I say, I think it's even multiples of that 5 million that are killed. So if you're doing that, forget about all the other things that you're doing. You're ultimately going to find that you cannot remove this kind of dark shroud of negative karmic reaction that's going to affect your country because of this fundamental mistake that's been made in the first place, the innocent slaughter and the inflicting of pain and suffering on innocent sentient beings like that. And we see that. You just look through the history, just take this country and look through its history. How far do you want to go back? I don't know, but if we go back, say, anyway, how far do you want to go back? You can go back ad infinitum. But let's say we go back 150 or so years, what was the biggest event that took place around that time? Was what's known as the famine. The famine, I think, prior to the famine striking, I think the population of the country, I think, was 6 million, I think it was, something like that. And then, in the aftermath of the famine, a year or two later, or whatever it was exactly, the population had gone down to 2 million. So 4 million people through a combination of dying because of the famine, and also leaving the country because there was literally nothing to. Can you imagine how hellish it must have been? Nowadays, of course, this is a relative point because we're slaughtering more animals now than we've ever slaughtered in the history of our country, so the karma is still there, and so many bad things will happen. But if you go back to the famine time, can you think how hellish it would be? Literally nothing to eat. One of the main things that killed people in the famine was that because there was nothing to eat, people started to eat grass, just like the animals would eat grass. But of course, we don't have the digestive. Ironically enough, if they somehow would have chewed on the grass and extracted all the juice from it, and then spat out the pulp, then that would have been fine. Of course, can you imagine living on grass juice? Boy, actually they have those images, those kind of statue images down on the river Liffey, depicting some of the people living in the famine. And one thing that's so real about that, one thing that's so vivid about that, I should say, is they're just stick-like. And of course that reflects, the fact that people were starving, they had nothing to eat, so they certainly weren't overweight. So people were eating grass, but they couldn't digest the grass, and that apparently was one of the main ways that the people who died during the famine time, that was one of the main ways that they died. Their stomachs were just full of undigested material, in this case grass. Anyway, focusing a little bit too much on that maybe, but the point I was just going to make was that's 150 years ago. Can you imagine how hellish that must have been, and the suffering that must have been going on or taking place at that time. So now you spin it forward, and right throughout history, obviously Ireland is somewhat famous for that, using that euphemistic term, the Troubles, where 30 odd years of just fighting taking place. And of course externally we look at it and we say, oh yes, the fighting took place because this country is ours, it's Irish, why are the British here, etc. So they're the externals of why the conflict took place. But we should never be satisfied with just looking at externals. We always should try to look within and look deeper, both within ourselves for the way that we conduct our own lives and live our own lives, but also for answers to some of life's big questions, that we don't just take some, relatively superficial external explanation of that. So the external explanation, why the British here, etc., but we have to look deeper and see, what to speak of the Vedic literature that we obviously take the lion's share, if not the whole share, of our information from and understanding from of how the world works and our relationship to it and how we all fit in. But even if you so many other philosophers, wasn't it Tolstoy, that said that for as long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields, making a direct causal link between the slaughter of animals and war. And we even have a phrase in English, there's no such thing as a free lunch, but somehow or another we don't implement that. We can't, or at least we can't seem to implement it other than in a very limited and time-bound way. We can't sort of see outside the box that it may have some bearing, or that it's not just that short-term way of looking at it. There's a longer view, a wider view and a longer view, a deeper view of looking at these things. So obviously Tolstoy was making that direct karmic relationship between the slaughter of animals and war. But it's not that they necessarily happen instantly, that somebody eats a hamburger and then next thing they're involved in a war. It doesn't work like that. The whole karma is such a complicated and complex. In one sense, it's very simple. Karma, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you do something bad, you're going to get a bad reaction. If you do something good, you'll get a good reaction. So in one sense, it's very simple. But in terms of how it rolls out, it's so much more complicated and complex in terms of its timelines, etc., and whatever. So so there's karma that is instant. I think somebody famously sang about that one time. Then there's karma that is in the fructifying stage. There's karma that's in the seed stage, and it's just it's a very complex and long-term arrangement, the laws of karma. And then anyway, different philosophers have written on this principle. So in that sense, just as I said earlier, that modern governments, modern societies have retained this this example of Mahārāja Parīkṣit in terms of the army presenting themselves and on their possessions, etc., etc. So also elements, different philosophers and personalities over the years, they've understood different elements of their Vedic literature and taken them like that. So anyway, Prabhupada's focus in relation to this particular subject is always on the leadership, and how without proper leadership, society just cannot function. And of course, what is the leadership in society? There's essentially two aspects to it, if you like. And unless they're in sync and working together in unison, you'll have problems. Society won't function properly. And those two aspects that need to be working together, cooperating, and working hand in glove together are the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas. And of course the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas are referring to two orders of society, two of the Varnas, occupational duties in society, of which there are four. there are the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Sudras. And it's interesting that, and the most important point, that those are naturally occurring in society. They just naturally occur in society. The Brahmins are kind of the intellectual class, the priestly class, and you see that. You see that. I know in school we used to talk about the bookworms, and the swats, I think is the word that we used, and the kids. And typically, those kids, they'd have glasses, usually round glasses, and they'd look a little weedy, and whatever, and they'd always have their head in a book, studying like that. So if not anyone forces them to do that, it just comes naturally to them. And then the Kshatriyas are more like the kind of administrators and warrior kind of class like that. So you'd also have those in school too, the guys who strut around, the big guys, strong guys, who are the kind of natural leaders really like that in school. Then you have the people, the Vaishyas, who are the kind of business class, if you like, also the agricultural class, but business class. And that was another thing that you saw, even from your school days. I remember there was one guy in my school who every holiday period, Christmas, summer, or Easter, whatever it was, he'd have some scheme for making money, whatever that scheme was. He had some scheme for making money, and you could just see it was just so natural to him. And if I tried or others tried, you'd end up losing money, but somehow or another he had this knack, there were a few of them like that actually, but I remember one in particular, he had just such a knack for being able to generate Lakshmi like that, or money like that. So that's the Vaishya class, and then you have the Sudra class, or those who are good with their hands, the kind of carpenters and all that kind of thing, and the artists. And again, if you take art as an example, some people are just gifted. You put a piece of paper in front of them, pens, charcoal, paints, whatever it may be, and it's like next thing they produce this beautiful picture. Whereas any time I try to do that, just anything I draw, they've got this category of art called naive art, which is a great relief to me, because any time that I pick up a pen or anything like that and try to draw something, it looks so childish. it looks like an 8-year-old has done it or whatever, But then I can just put it in the category. Oh, well, this is naive art. So again, that comes as a natural ability for many people. So these things are naturally occurring, and that's why, according to the Varna Ashram system, or the Vedic system, your Varna, or your occupational duty, is based on your guna and your karma, like that. So it's based on your karma, which you inherit from previous lifetimes, and your guna, which is your natural proclivity, whatever that may be. And not on your birth. It's got nothing to do with your birth, where you're born, or who your parents are. No, that's artificial. It has to come naturally. And that naturally occurs in society. It's there, and to try to negate that is as foolish and as wrong as trying to enforce it based on other criteria like birth. So as long as it's based on the right criteria, guna and karma, and what's occurring naturally in the individual person, we shouldn't try to suppress that. But likewise, we shouldn't try to, put square pegs into round holes by trying to force people into a activity that they're not inclined towards, because just based on their birth, so their parents, so their father was a doctor, therefore you've got to be a doctor, even though you might not have that tendency whatsoever. But anyway, so that leadership, the cooperation between the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins, so between the intellectual priestly class, so two things there, intellectual meaning intelligent obviously, and priestly, which should mean, may have another connotation these days, but priestly should also mean, sattvic, doing the right thing, good, character, having good character and all of that kind of thing. So those two things, intelligence and good character, that's the Brahminical class. And then the Kshatriya class are the administrators and the warriors, who stand up for the right principles and ultimately will be willing to sacrifice their own lives in order to protect them like that. So when you have these two elements working in cooperation, you get an absolutely perfect situation. The Brahmanas, who do not administrate at all and have no power, they're literally advisors. So they're advising like that. But their advice is wonderful advice because it's based on intelligence and integrity. So those two things, the two I's, intelligence and integrity put together, that's what their advice is based on. And then the Kshatriyas, they're the ones with the power, but it's not a misguided, misdirected power. They're actually taking that instruction from people who are both intelligent and also full of integrity. So when you have those two elements combined together, working together to lead society, society is an absolute perfect place. The Brahmanas, of course, will take their advice from the Vedic tradition. So therefore, all such things as animal killing won't exist. They won't be advising Kshatriya. They'll be advising the exact opposite for the Kshatriyas to protect the animals and look after the animals. And likewise, so many other aspects of leadership, they will advise in the right way, based on integrity. And then the Kshatriyas, if they're humble and surrender, even though obviously they're the ones with the power, and they listen to this advice and take this advice and implement this advice, you're going to have an absolutely perfect society. So, okay, I think I will stop there at 8:15, there or thereabouts. I know you all have a busy day ahead of you, and I shouldn't go on too long and take advantage of your time or steal some of your time. But yeah, these are just very, very interesting aspects of Srila Prabhupada's teachings and what he's giving us and what he's wanting us. Prabhupada is no better Brahman, and indeed there's no better Kshatriya really than Srila Prabhupada. So it's just so wise of us, for our own benefit, for our own self-interest, forget about the interest of others for a moment, just for our own self-interest. It just makes so much sense for us to take what Srila Prabhupada has given us and implement it and apply it to our lives. It will literally solve all our problems, as opposed to those who are trying to solve problems by just working on peripheral externals and not getting to the essence. Srila Prabhupada gets to the essence every single time. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.